Who ever thought that a wedding could be so interesting? There I was at a wedding for my good friend Justin Levine, who's been on the podcast twice, and I was sitting next to a fascinating man. Turns out he loves jujitsu, he's a black belt. He's also a highly influential music executive, and he's been the head of a number of record companies. And he's actually helped launch artists such as Sam Smith, 5 Seconds of Summer, Jay-Z, Paloma Faith, and Ollie Murs. His name is Nick Raphael, and Nick is here with me now at home in his kitchen, and we're going to have an amazing chat. Nick, welcome, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I think the thing we were chatting about in our warm up, and again just earlier, about finding musical talent that people are going to having that skill of knowing who will work well and who won't. What do you reckon is that skill in finding people who will inspire others? I mean, this is an inspiring leadership program, and you're finding people like Sam Smith who've inspired millions.
I've done this before, so I'm sort of semi-repeating myself, but I haven't done it for your audience. I deal in a world of human beings, and people will say to me, are you looking out for their voice? Are you listening out for their talent? Are you looking out for this? Of course, they are factors in this. The first and most important thing I'm looking out for is likability. Number one factor. If I think the person I'm sat in front of, talking to, is unlikable, the chances of me being able to promote them to the world is impossible, because people have to like them. I think the people we love in society, even the people we hate as well, they create a reaction in you. But I'm looking for people are going to generally love. Number one. Number two, I'm looking for people who've got incredible work ethic, right? And they need to work harder than any other normal human being does. Yes, the people at the tops of companies, the people who are the elite in sport, the people who are the elite in the military, they're working bloody hard, and that's all goes with the thing. Their talent is important. If they have no talent, there's nothing to promote. But if they have all the talent in the world and they're absolutely unlikable, no one is going to buy into them. No one's going to believe in them. And I use this example, and I always use this example with a caveat. And I said this on another podcast recently that I did. If you put Madonna, who's one of my favorite and greatest artists of all time, into a singing competition that's based on technical ability, she would not come in the top half. But if you put all those brilliant singers that beat her in a competition to see who was more driven, more ambitious, and more likable to the general public, she would kill them by a massive multiplier. It wouldn't even be a competition. It'd be like having the greatest tennis player in the world playing against a primary school player. It just wouldn't be fair. And what Madonna had, she had charisma, she had a work ethic, and she had ambition. And the small amount of talent which she had, she got every inch out of it, every millimeter out of it, and become one of the most important and iconic artists of all time. Yeah. And if you said compare her voice to Luciano Pavarotti, they're not comparable. They're doing different sectors. Or compare her voice to Adele, they're not the same. But compare her influence on society, I believe she's one of the most important people in music, one of the most important iconic people of all time. Yeah. And that is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I loved it as we were chatting at the wedding. By the way, how did you know Justin? What was the original connection with Justin? How did you meet?
Jujitsu. Justin turned up at Jujitsu through another friend of ours called Nima. And Nima had gone to school with Justin. Justin obviously is wheelchair bound and came on the mat. And, it's awkward. You got someone who clearly can't move their legs, got the gi on, wants to do jiu-jitsu. And I just walked over and said, have you got a partner? And Justin said, no. Why? Do you want to go with me? And I said, yeah. And we never discussed his disabilities. We just got on. He grabbed me by his grips. He's probably the physically strongest man I've ever been held by, maybe because he's a marathon wheelchair competitor. And I rolled with him and didn't treat him any differently to any other partner. And then he thanked me, and then someone else came up. I broke the ice on that day for everybody else. And every time Justin came to the mat, I made it my point to go and roll with him first, because I know it was clear that everybody else felt awkward. And I know Justin wanted to do jiu-jitsu. He's turned up, he's wearing a gi, he's got every right to be on the mat. And I wanted to treat him as an equal. And I just did it. And then when he was doing this thing across America, he contacted me, knew I knew loads of people in America. Anytime he did anything, he'd reach out. We both live in North London. And I became a friend of his. And
Yeah.
there was no agenda. I just did it because I thought, well, he's turned up. And by the way, I'm also old. I'm 53. Most of the people doing jiu-jitsu are probably in their 20s and 30s. And those that do get to my age, most people start jiu-jitsu earlier in life. I started jiu-jitsu at 36. So I know how some people don't even come up to you and want to roll with you because they're like, oh, that old geezer doesn't want to roll with you. And I'm like, yeah, I do actually, please.
Yeah.
Include me. So I felt that, I liked Justin a lot. And then I got to know him. And he's just a really, really, really interesting, really bright, and really unique human being. So I'm a big fan, huge fan.
No, well, he has valued your friendship. And when we were doing 7 Emirates in 7 days, and we got to
Yeah,
meet Lee and I got to meet him and become friends with Justin,
yeah,
he did say you need to meet Nick Raphael.
yeah,
And here we are. We've met, and you're on the podcast, which is fantastic. Um, Thinking about the sort of the talented people you've met, who would you give a call out for a couple of inspiring leaders that you'd like to be your guests on the podcast that you think would be interesting for people to listen to? And what qualities
yeah.
do you value about them?
Look, the greatest person, I don't think I can get him for you, but I'd love to, would be one of the people I met very early in my career, Jay-Z. I met him
Mhm.
in 1996. He'd been in the marketplace for 8 years. He got signed, he got dropped. As an artist, it was presumed when you got dropped, you were damaged goods and no one wants to be with you. He went and borrowed the money from street lenders to make the album, which is Reasonable Doubt, that's been voted by The Guardian and multiple hip hop magazines as either the greatest or one of the top three greatest hip hop albums ever made. And he released it himself with his college or his friend we knew, Damon Dash. He wasn't at college with him. I don't think Jay went to college. And they released the album and they did it themselves. And they released it independently. And I turned up and I said, look, I'd love to license it from you. And they desperately needed to pay the street vendors back. And Jay, even though he was a failed artist, had been in the marketplace 8 years, was viewed by the record business as damaged goods, was the most unbelievably driven, intelligent. He spoke like a CEO when he was an artist, and he had this vision of all the things that were going to happen. And I remember my business partner then, Christian, who later became the CEO of Warner's. He said to me when we met first meeting, "What do you think?" And I said, "We got to sign him one." But he said, "But all the things he said, he's going to start a fashion brand. He's going to do this. He's going to emulate this person, emulate that person. He's all these things." And I said, "Look, either he's the biggest fantasist we ever met, or he's going to be one of the most influential people of all time." But at that point, it was beyond. It was he when you was within his company, you believed everything he said, but it was beyond comprehension that he could actually do it. Because at
Mm,
that point, he was at the lowest point an artist could be. He'd just been dropped. He couldn't pay back the street, and he achieved all these things. Today, allegedly, and I know money is not the barometer, but he's a business person. He's regarded as a minimum of a billionaire, minimum,
yeah.
and he's had been successful across a multitude of businesses. And he understood the value of his brand of himself. And he was fascinating. He was brilliant. He was inspiring, and he was funny and friendly and good to be with.
Yeah, and of course now he's teamed up with Beyonce, so that you got such a powerful combination there. And who would be the second person that you want to speak out about, and what qualities have you admired about them?
Um, you know, I'm gonna. I'm not asking to be on your podcast because they'll contradict everything I ever said. But I think they deserve it because I think everyone will put people up there. Me putting Jay-Z up there. Oh, it's almost a humble brag. Oh, the guy did Jay-Z. Oh, really interesting. You know what? and we can get to this later as well, and we can go into other people in business I've met and people I'm, who I'm interested in. My parents,
Hmm.
and I say my parents for a reason. But as a child, from the earliest memories, I would sit at the table and they'd talk about revenue, turnover revenue, talk about net profit, gross profit, tax, um, investment for next year. Have you got enough, working capital? And I thought these were things that everyone discussed at home. I had no idea that my parents were unique in both being entrepreneurs. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My uncle's an entrepreneur. Everyone in my family were in different businesses and were entrepreneurs. Even my parents were in different businesses and were entrepreneurs. My mum, when I was very young, had an au pair agency before she went into recruitment and had an office in South Morton Street. And the learnings they gave me, and I call it by osmosis.
Hmm.
They weren't sitting there giving me a lecture on this stuff. They discussed it in front of me all the time. Their friends were entrepreneurs. Their friends were in business. So when they were talking amongst themselves, when they're talking to my grandfather or they're talking to my uncle, they're talking to family friends, they spoke in these terms. So when I arrived in business, at the humble age of 16 in my first ever business endeavor, and later on, when I was growing up, maybe 19, when I was back in business, I was already had the vernacular. I already had the vocabulary. I also understood what these things meant. And I've got to be honest with you, and I don't want to embarrass anyone. I was with later on in my career very, very senior people who didn't know the difference between net and gross, who were bluffing their way through finance meetings, who were very good at the other parts of the business. And I found it ridiculous. I then ended up working for an entrepreneur at the beginning of my career called Roger Ames, who built a business and then sold it for $250 million, which is a matter of public record. Roger was obsessed with, you've spent my money on this, because he called it his money, which it was, and how much do you think you're going to get in return? And he didn't care if you lost it. He just wanted to know going into it, you knew the upside, you knew the downside, and you were accountable to him. And it was amazing because that's how I thought everyone operated. Then I moved into the more corporate side and I ended up at BMG and I was shocked. They used to go ask the finance department. I said, come on, you must know the rough parameters of what we're doing. And they go, no, 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 get your finance person to give you a profit and loss on that. And I said, come on, well, we're going to spend X on A&R, making the record. We're going to spend on signing the artist. We're going to spend X on marketing. And our overhead is this. And we're going to commit this much time. And are we going to get the return on it? And they'd all look at me and go, it's not that simple. And I was like, it is. So I was very, very fortunate.
You were, and I think the whole family story is fascinating. I want in a minute to hear about Papa
Mm.
Charles
Yeah.
because he was quite a legend, and also I love the fact. I met a music artist the other day called Hercules Smith, and he's from South Africa, and
Mm.
we just listened to some of his music and some of his songs. But I was just sort of thinking of you when I was listening to him in his recording studio, and he's doing something. He's prepared an album which he's trying to release, but as I was with these people, I was thinking about your mum, and you've had all these successes. But I love that story about your mum. She goes, I was talking to this taxi driver, and his daughter's really good. And you went, yeah, yeah, whatever, mum. Tell the story. It's such a good story. I love it.
So you're 90% right. My mother, we grew up in Southgate, North London. And my mother called me one day to inform me that there was a taxi driver in Southgate. Not, she wasn't in the taxi. There
No,
was a
no.
taxi driver in Southgate who was known amongst the Jewish community. And he was telling everyone his daughter was an incredible singer. And as I was in the record business, she thought it was her duty to tell me to check out his daughter. To which I replied, you stick to recruitment, I'll stick to music. Thanks for the tip, but thank you, but no thank you. In a sort of very adolescent, childish response that only a son can give to his mother. And I then ignored it, never thought about it again. Thought, oh my God, why is my mum interfering in my business? I don't call her up, tell her that I've got candidates for her. She'd probably quite like me to get candidates for her or opportunities for her. But anyway, I thought to myself, I'll stick to my field, she'll stick to hers. And that was all fine. And that was the end of the conversation. And I thought, I will never have this conversation with her about it again. Anyway, that ends. Then my guy in my next office, slightly too much information. The guy in my next office, a guy called George Bascom Roberts, a young A&R guy, used to have this girlfriend who used to turn up and smoke cigarettes and weed in the office next door when you're not allowed to smoke cigarettes in the building at Sony in those days, and you definitely weren't allowed to smoke weed. And she'd come by a couple of days a week, and every time she came by, security would have to come and ask us to stop doing what she's doing and eventually eject her from the building. It happened, I mean, multiple times. And I had the office next door, and I could just smell weed wafting in through my air conditioning. So I'd always be like, oh, bloody hell, he's got that annoying girl in again who used to sit on the floor and smoke weed. And I never thought about that ever again. And then one afternoon, we had the A&R meeting, which is the meeting where we look at new artists and we look at recordings we're making across the whole company with the chairman, Rob Stringer, and the president of the company, Muff Winwood, a legend, Steve Winwood's brother, who used to be in the Spencer Davis Group, really famous musician, stroke producer, stroke executive, Muff. And George plays a demo by the girl who used to sit on his floor and smoke weed, and said, look, I'm sort of dating her, so probably not right for me to get involved, but I know a few other record companies looking at her. Check out her demo. And he plays this really jazzy track by this girl, and it was really non-commercial, it was very jazzy. And he said, yeah, 2, 3 record companies are interested. And the minute he said the girl who used to sit in my office, I was like, pass, 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 headache, don't need it, in my head. Didn't say that out loud. And the general consensus in the room, it's a bit jazz, a bit uncommercial, we're not interested. Cut to, she gets signed to Island Records. She releases an album that's quite jazz, does okay, not great. Second album comes out, and she becomes the biggest star in the world at that moment. And her name is Amy Winehouse. And my mum calls me and says, do you remember I called you? And I went, the taxi driver in Southgate. And she went, yeah. She goes, that's Amy Winehouse. And I went, I know, Mum, I've worked it out. At which point I was beyond mortified.
Yeah.
And my mum had tipped me off on Amy Winehouse, and I'd completely missed her. But the next tip, I did listen to her, which was an artist called Lamar, who'd been on Fame Academy.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
did follow through, and he became a very successful artist for me on Sony. And Mum, thank you. That tip I followed up on. But that does
Wow.
not give you the right to call me on anybody you ever hear who can sing.
No, that's right. And I imagine you get lots of people who go, oh, I know this really good one here or this really good one there.
One more story on that if you want. My aunt,
Yeah.
her hairdresser's daughter, you should check her out. I went, yeah, right, cool, same thing. Typical me. And then I had this massive hit with a song which my songwriter wrote called Jimmy Napes. And it was the beginning of 2014. It was all over the radio. It's called Rather Be. And I went to my aunt's house. I went to like a family tea or a family dinner. And my aunt said, oh, do you remember my hairdresser's daughter? She's got the #1 record at the moment. I said, really? I've got the #1 record at the moment. My writer wrote it, Jimmy Napes. And she went, yeah. The song, I think it's called Rather Be. And I went, yeah. And she went, you know Jess who sings it? I went, yeah. She goes, that's the girl I was telling you about. And I was like, oh, another one. So it's not the first or the last time I'm going to do it, but I have ignored several family members. My
this
mum
is,
gets the ultimate win, but
yeah.
yes, my aunt also tipped me on Jess Glynn.
But this is a lovely story. And I think you're in an industry where there are massive egos, lots
Yes.
of name dropping. Do you know who I am? Lots of divas, lots of lacking humility. So how do you cope with all the big egos? I mean, you're a confident guy yourself, but I see you checking yourself in when we were chatting at the wedding.
Yeah.
Do I say I know all these people, or do I just hold back a bit? And I think you've generally, when I met you socially, you got it just nicely right. You were very modest, and it only emerged over time. I didn't know who you were to begin with,
Yeah.
and then I made the connections with Justin talking about how much a good friend you'd been to him. But I didn't make the connection with music. But how do you manage that when you're in a world full of enormous egos and insecurity?
First thing I want to say is really, really important. My job is to serve these wonderful people. My job is not to be famous myself. I tried. I was a recording artist for a short minute, and I was very bad. I was a producer recording artist rather than the front person recording. I wasn't a singer per se. So I appreciate how difficult it is for these people and to put themselves out there. And ultimately, if an album doesn't work that I make, only the people around me know that I had some involvement with my team on that album. If an album does really well, but if an album doesn't work and it has your face on it and your name on it, it's a failure for you, not as in the artists themselves. So, when we've had mega successes with some of the artists you mentioned, yeah, they get all the plaudits and rightly so. And my job is to sit in the background and say, well done. We collectively got it right. You now have a big career, and you have to accept that sometimes a brilliant TV show that won a load of Emmys and with Seth Rogen. I'm going to forget the bloody name of the show now. And one of the episodes in the studio, he goes to an award ceremony. He's head of the studio, and the artist goes up on stage and chooses not to thank him. And he's devastated and crestfallen. And I know what that feels. We all know what that feels like. By the way, my artists have generally been great, but you have an ego. Every one of us has an ego. But one thing I understand in my business is my ego is not important. The ego that's important is the I have to manage everyone else's ego to allow the end result to become the end result. That is my job. The CEO's job is that as well. Sometimes they have to sit behind somebody who runs a division of theirs or runs a business of theirs who's showing off their incredible year's results or the incredible invention their company created. And even though the CEO backed them, took the risk with them, went down this path with them, the minute it happens, they're in the Financial Times, they're in the newspapers talking about how incredible they are and what they did, and ignoring and not giving the CEO the plaudits that they deserve. In my business, ultimately, the artist is front and center. Our job is to service the artist. And in the business itself, the CEOs around the world are also famous for what they do. Even more so than I have, and I've received plaudits along the way, which are great. But I understand my job is a facilitator, and if I wanted to take the risk the artist took, then maybe I get a different level of a different level of ego. And it is very difficult when you meet strangers for the first time and you talk about the business you're in. A lot of people's reaction is, "Oh, have you met so and so? Have you done this? Have you done that?" And you're like, and to some extent, you want to say, "Oh, yeah, 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 yeah." And the other extent, you don't want to be that guy. And to be honest, a lot of the most famous people I've ever met, one of them seriously famous, Simon Cowell, who worked with him at Sony, was just another A&R guy, just another guy he was a label president and A&R guy. And I used to sit in meetings with him and laugh out loud at some of the conversations we had. And he behaved the same way he behaves on TV, but he's in a private meeting. And can you imagine someone going, "It's not bloody good enough. I can't believe anyone would play that." And you're all laughing, and it was in a private situation. The doors were shut. There's no cameras. Then he gets on TV and he does the same shtick. And you're like, he's not pretending. We used to do that in the meetings. So he made my job famous because that's being an A&R person on TV. Louis Walsh, who sat next to him, was a manager I'd already worked with. And yeah, at one hand, you don't want to be the person name dropping. The other hand, they're not famous people to you. They're just examples to other people of the job that you do, so they understand. When they say, like we had this conversation before we started, is you have to look up what A&R is, which is artists and repertoire, right? I've said to you, I have a different take on what it is. But who was the most famous A&R person in the UK? It was Simon Cowell. And why was he famous? Because he took the process and showed it on TV,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
I think it's that's been fascinating, and I have enjoyed watching him and his highs and his lows, and the way the almost like the artistry of it and the drama of it, and it is fascinating. Now, one of the things that you and I share in common is we're both dyslexics. And you probably got more ADHD than I have. I think my wife has the other half of our ADHD. But do you feel that it's like a sort of gives you a competitive edge in a cutthroat music industry? And has it shaped the way you lead and make decisions?
I'm going to answer it in two different ways. First of all, ADHD is a serious thing, and it's attention deficit disorder. Okay, so it's a nightmare, right? And as all the way through childhood, it plagued me, and no one ever diagnosed it. And I couldn't sit still. I couldn't concentrate on anything, and I got really disinterested really quickly, which I know is true of a lot of children, but is extremely true of people with a disorder. I have never found it a hindrance because I didn't know I had it. And now it's being diagnosed in the entire world. And
Mm.
my wife laughs and said, "You're the person who's got it worse than anybody else." But it also, in a world of a 2.5 minute, 3 minute, 3.5 minute pop song, it's quite good that if I get bored quickly, then pop song probably isn't very good anyway. Um, and you know, the other thing is like doing jujitsu. You can't be ADHD. You gotta listen. You gotta. I've trained for 17 years this year, right?
Yep.
And I'll
Yep.
be 6 years as a black belt, and I've trained. That requires a lot of time, attention, and focus. I'm obsessed with playing chess, which hopefully slows down my ADHD. So, is it a benefit to me? Yes, it is. But I don't know what it's like not to have it. So I can't tell you what it's like not to have it. But I do think I look. I take everything I've got, negative and positive, as a plus.
Yeah.
You know, and then if you don't, then you're just defeated the whole time because.
Yeah,
Oh,
and what is so interesting in the conversation that we've had over the last few days since we met was, um, you know, your upbringing, your early years, the fact that you, when you're at Leeds University reading economics, um, you actually were spending more time as a DJ in Leeds and running a nightclub, which actually gave you the superpower to recognize what worked for people and what didn't work. And when you played certain
correct.
songs, you sort of knew, you got that sense. So I think that's a really smart way of growing up, to give you the that fingertip feel, the Germans call it Fingerspitzengefühl. And the fact that you were rarely there, I think, was a great story that you told me as well. Tell me about that early years and how that shaped the music talent spotter you are today.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, and I've said I also repeat this story so many times because I do talks for kids all the time to try and inspire them, try and get join the business, try and come to work for me. Is tried to play professional football. I failed miserably. Just I played as a youth player very well. I got to senior level, and I basically got a choice to sign full time, not give up university, or to stay at university to stay playing football. So I chose to go to university, and I'd already upset my parents by playing football anyway. Then I had to get a job to make up for the lack of income, and I worked in a pizza parlor. And then because I'd stopped playing professional sport, there was a whole music movement of house music and DJs and da da da. And I wanted to indulge and find out about it. Remember, I had no as much recreational fun as my friends. I'm saying this very conservatively rather than offend anybody. So I had been very sport orientated, and all of a sudden I wanted to find out what the big bad world had for fun and recreation. So I was going to nightclubs and doing all the things that teenagers shouldn't have done during the rave era. And I would queue up, and it was in the north of England, Leeds, and it was raining, and I'd got my hard-earned money from the pizza place, and all the best looking, because I was a young heterosexual male full of testosterone, ladies were going in before I could, and I was getting wet. One of them walked in, she was with the DJ. One of them, even more beautiful, she was on my course actually at Leeds, walked past me, and she went in, and I said, "Well, who's she with?" She said hello to me on the way past in the queue. I said, "Oh, she's with the promoter." So I thought, this is awful. So before we even start the night, the two most beautiful girls were going to be in the venue are spoken for. So I'm already, and by the way, I'm not the most beautiful person either. So I'm thinking, God, I've got to have to get one of those jobs because clearly, that's where the girls gravitate towards. And then when I saw the promoter and DJ, I wasn't exactly blown away by the Brad Pitt esque looks. So I was then, and I'd already done a night in London when I was 16 with my friends at school. So I already had a tiny, minuscule bit of experience, as with most people who are entrepreneurs or what I don't know, hustlers. You use that little bit of experience and slightly exaggerate it, and you get an opportunity. And an opportunity came my way via a sign for application for a license in Leeds, and I applied. I called them up and said, "Do you need any help?" They said, "Yeah, do you know anything about nightclubs?" I told them I'd run a club in London. One night I'd run in London. And these two interesting characters hired me to run the whole thing.
Wow.
And I was at university. And they said, "I'll give you 400 quid a week cash." I was like, wow, I'll do that job. I'm working in a pizza parlor earning £2.25 or £2.50 an hour. And now I'm going to run a nightclub. be in charge, and someone's going to pay me net 400 quid a week. I was like, yes, I've won the lottery. So I ended up in the nightclub business, and then through that, I did several nightclubs, several events, and I ended up becoming a DJ merely because once the night is open, the first 2 hours you pay the DJ to play, and the records they were playing were easily, I could buy them at a record shop or get them from record companies, and I was paying 150 to 200 pound for these guys to play, or girls, and I was thinking to myself, I've got nothing to do once the club opens because I promoted it. So either the punters are there or they're not there, and if they are there, I'd rather be behind a DJ booth so I'm not being called to the front door to give out guest list requests. So I decided I'd become the DJ and the promoter. And then I became more and more well known as the DJ. So I was, instead of playing the opening slot, I was playing the main slot. And I became a very famous professional DJ. I played 1,000 shows in the end, and I had a very successful
Wow.
club with two other people called Susie and Paul, called Vague in Leeds, and it got voted #1 club in Europe every 2 weeks for 2 years. And it was mega successful. But it gave me a platform in which to play music to an audience and get an immediate response. And then you get that gut feel of playing a record and about 30 seconds in realizing no one's getting the excitement that you got 3 days before when you played it. It's like a product launch, but it's a soft product launch. And you're like, oh shit, I thought this would be I thought everyone would like this new version of Coke, and they don't, right?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit more serious when they tried to rebrand Coca-Cola all those years ago. But you understand what I mean? So I was like getting hands-on feel. When my now partner, wife, was then my girlfriend, but too soon to become my girlfriend, I met in Leeds. She got an opportunity as a model to come and live in London and pursue her modeling career. I followed her, and anyway, so at which point I moved to London and I got a traditional job from Monday to Thursday at a record company. And everyone, the A&R people, the people finding the new records and the new talent, they were missing on all these records I was playing at the weekend. And the guys in those departments weren't DJs, all scratching their chins saying, not sure about the middle eight, not sure about the girl's voice, not sure about the drums. And I'd be going, shut up. I've just played to 4,000 people over the weekend in 4 different venues, 1,000 people in each venue, approximately, averaging it out. And they went mad to this song, and no one's ever heard it before because it's a white label. It's not in general circulation. And they'd all be telling me, oh, yeah, stick to your job, go and do marketing downstairs, mate. And I went to the then boss, Colin Bell, who was very, very supportive of me, and said, look, we're missing on all these records. I'd like to sign some of them. He said, Nick, if you sign a record and it goes top 10, you can sign another one. And if it doesn't go top 10, get back to the marketing, and in 18 months we'll look at, where your career is going to go in this record company. But, you're not here to sign records, you're here to do marketing. So I signed my first record and it went to #6 in the chart.
Wow.
And then the second record I signed, by the way, that was unheard of. If an A&R person at that point, young dance A&R person, had one hit in a year, and a hit would be a top 20 record, they were regarded as good. I had one for one. But the thing was, I was cheating. I was playing every weekend. So I could see the audience. And it's not cheating, it wasn't illegal, but I could see an organ. It's like market research, my own private market research. Because I was
Fantastic.
playing nationwide and then internationally later on, I was getting the feedback and I was doing this. So then I signed my second record, and I get a little bit too much information, but I'll make you laugh. Signed my second record, it went to 42 in the chart. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to have to go back to marketing. So Colin comes downstairs and says, look, your second record hasn't worked as well as your first. Look, can we focus on the job you were hired for? I appreciate that you had a hit straight off, well done, but let's get back to the day job. I said, okay, cool. And then a guy at another record company called Nick Worthington was doing remixes of Dancing Divas. And I just called him up, so will you do me a favour? You do me a remix on that record I released? He said, yeah, pay me 5, 6,000, 3,000, whatever it was, amount of money, I'll do it for you. So I convinced the record company to let me do a remix, pay for the remix. I re-released the record and it goes to #6 in the chart. And I go up
Wow.
to Colin and I go, right, 2 for 2. Now you got to give me a chance.
That's
And at
very
which
good.
point, the guys in the A&R part were so upset by my behaviour that they went to their boss and said, look, it's embarrassing having Nick on the marketing floor, 2 hits, top 10 hits in within like 8 weeks of each other. And then they hired me to go upstairs, be head of the label, as in the dance label, not the whole company. And my now business partner, Christian, was next door to me. He was running his own label for marketing floor, and he's having #1 records. So we were humiliating there in our department. But the truth was, mine was born out of being in, you know, and I love it when I read about CEOs, and I'm obsessed with it. Two of my favorite podcasts, Acquired, which is absolutely brilliant, and Founders, two brilliant podcasts, right? And they talk about some CEOs that actually go on the shop floor to the day they die, right? And they amongst the staff or everywhere they are around the world, they pop into a depot, they go on their own planes, they talk to the staff. And to me, being a club DJ at that time and working in a dance company, I was on the shop floor.
It is brilliant. And actually, this fits with many of the other guests that I've had as entrepreneurs. I was thinking about the president of UPS in America, and he
Yeah,
began as a parcel handler.
yeah.
And he still gets and relates to the guys who are out there. And I wrote about him in the next book, The CEO's Compass, How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times. And here it is. It's just arrived, hot off the
I look
press.
forward to reading it.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. We've got to get it out there because all the profits go to the charity to help the most vulnerable in society and the victims of violence against women and girls. So please spread the
Okay,
word.
I will.
One of the things that you and I spoke about, which I've seen with other guests on the Inspiring Leadership podcast, is they have two things which are both strengths, but they can be overdone. One is they're competitive, and secondly is they are highly into comparing themselves, like you and Simon Cowell, or Louis Walsh, or whatever it might be. Uh, you've also used that skill in when you go fighting in the Jujitsu, which one of our other guests, Stazikler, who got the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross, he said, "Yeah, I like having it where other men fold my jujitsu suit for me." I thought with me in it, and I thought there's another
Exactly.
expression.
That's a famous. That's a very famous jiu-jitsu thing. It's only
Yeah,
what I can do where someone folds my clothes with me still in them.
with you still in them, which is
Yeah.
great. So tell me about being both competitive and comparative, both the benefits, but also what some of the prices you have to pay for that.
Competitiveness, again, like ADHD, I was born with it. Anything I ever try to do, I try and do better than the next person. I can't help myself. To me, there's no point. I fundamentally hate society for giving medals for participation. I can't abide it. I'm sorry if that makes me old fashioned and anti woke and all that. It's not that. I just think it's ridiculous. It's patronizing to those that take part. And you have to compete and you have to find something you can compete at. And when I always wanted to be regarded as the best in the field that I could be. And clearly at football, I failed because at the point I got to the highest echelon of sport, it was clear that I was good, but not good enough. Okay, so I had to accept it. And I've had to accept failure multiple times in my life. Getting back to you asked a question earlier about ego and humility. I think I mentioned this to you in our pre-chat. When I was in the music business, 1 in 100 artists will break even for a record company. That was the old thing. I'm not sure during the streaming age if it's worse or better. I can't speak to that because I haven't kept tabs. But when I worked for Sony and then when I worked for Universal, I kept a tab of everyone in the UK that got signed that I could keep. And I was very, very thorough in it. And I looked at, which ones actually succeeded and got to platinum status. You need to get to platinum status to make money generally. And I found it was an argument between me and the CEO. I said it's 1 in 50. The UK CEO, David Joseph, a nice man, and he'd say it's 1 in 40. Either way, it's tiny percentages. It means one in every 39 out of 40 acts fail. And my statistical thing since I've done it, I only signed 2 artists a year, has been 1 in 3. So statistically, I really believed in 3 artists because I signed them and I spent minimum of 2 years working with them, and 2 and 3 failed. So statistically, I'm a failure.
Mm,
Okay,
mm.
but I still regard myself as one of the best people in the world at doing what I do, and I'm very proud of that fact. And at one stage, I was probably number 1 for a couple of years. Okay, in the field, in the world. Okay, and in the UK, I was a top 5 player for the best part of 20 years, and definitely was number 1 or number 2 because the other 1 or 2 of the other big players, the people who do Adele, people who do Ed Sheeran, they were also in the UK. So we're all competing with each other. But there's a famous saying, and you're going to have to get it correct because I'm going to get comparison, and I can't remember the rest of the thing, but it is the root of all evil,
Mm.
right? Because look, if there's, there's always someone with a bigger boat,
Yeah.
right? And mine isn't about the money or the boat. Mine is, if I've been number one this week and I was number one for 5 weeks, in the 6th week, someone else is going to be number one. It just happens, right? Things move on. And you have to accept that you're not going to be the top dog forever.
Yeah.
And you have to adapt and change your role. So say you become a CEO and before you were, in my world, an A&R person, or you were a head of sales, or you were the CTO or whatever. When you become CEO, your role changes, right? And you're now overseeing people, and that's a different role. If you're a head trader at a bank and then you become the head of the bank, it changes. And I've been humbled by the fact that 2 and 3 artists failed, and I believed in them probably as much as the artists that succeeded, right? I just was wrong, or the chemistry between myself and my team and the artist couldn't unlock the world of their success. Okay, so that's very, very humbling.
Yeah.
So that's the reality for me. And the comparison, fucking hell, comparison is one of the hardest things. But you can't be competitive and not compare yourself.
No, I think the two do go together. So let's do a quick. We've got about 10 minutes before going to the top tip. Let's do a sort of quick fire round of the Inspiring Leadership Compass with your experience and advice with the people you've led, the talents you found. Let's begin with moral quotient. What advice would you give to people when they let their values slip? You've been brought up with set values with your parents and Papa Charles, who we talked about before. You have a clear idea about your values. You've let them slip at times. I've let mine slip. But what advice will you give to people when they have let their values slip? What do they do to get back on track?
Let's start with this. We're all human, right? We're all not perfect. Things are going to go wrong. Hopefully, you don't do things that are so bad that there is no coming back from. And there's an artist at the moment there's a story, it's public story, that an American artist, they found in his old abandoned car, one of his fans dead. An artist called David. It's totally true, right? I don't know how he comes back from that. He's going to have to be exonerated in a serious way, but it's terrible when if that something happens. We're not talking things of that level. I've never been involved in things at that level. Fortunately, I've had some terrible things happen to artists I've worked with. You People are human. Everyone's moral compass is different to someone else's. You can only account for yourself. You can only be responsible for yourself. I can't tell an artist what to do. I can't tell a staff member what to do. And what I have to do myself is try and lead by example.
Yeah.
That's what I've got to try and do.
No, I think it's very good. And you made me think of one of my other guests, in fact, two I've had. Catherine Vicente is the CEO of Red Fan Communications, and Emma Kane, who's the CEO of Sec Newgate. And their job is to really deal with high profile leaders around the world when everything goes wrong. It goes into meltdown, how you help them regain their brand. And that's a whole area which we've discussed before. Second one round.
Is that the Coldplay person?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the second one round, purpose quotient, what I call PQ, meaning and purpose. You, to me, seem to have found something that gives your life great meaning and purpose for quite some years. I know there's been highs and lows, and you've had some really down times when I seem to remember you got some kind of virus or something which caused a bit of a breakdown for you. So you've been through everything, but for looking at from the outside, you seem to have a sense of meaning and purpose in the work you do. How do people, when you're trying to help, even some of your artists, they've lost their way, they've lost their sense of meaning and purpose. How do you help people find meaning and purpose in what they do?
Oh God, for me, I've got to start with me. Once I got the bug of doing what I do, it's mad in my job. I'm helping people fulfill their dreams. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And it will change their lives and all the people around them. And I don't have a magical power, but I can facilitate already talented people, already ambitious people, already likable people to fulfill their wildest dreams. It's amazing. And in doing that, I can enrich myself, enrich them, further my reputation, further my brand, and I love that, right? Okay, so there's a positive for me, there's a huge positive for them, and then number of lives you affect goes on forever. I still talk to artists I signed 30 years ago, and
That's
I
nice.
still have a good relationship with them. It's amazing. When someone loses their mojo, I mean, I can't even imagine, and you've worked in the military and you've probably been in battle situations. There must be situations when people have lost friends,
Hmm.
literally in that moment, and they've got to fight on and they've got to continue on and they're questioning everything. And it must be the hardest thing ever. I'm not dealing with that. Let's be real. I'm not dealing with that. But people can lose their way. And your job is, you went into this together, you took the glory with them. So when it goes into those dark places, you got to go in there as a friend, as a mentor, as a sounding board. You got to help bring people around them. You got to support them, and you've got to. I've always said, and a slightly detour, but you brought her up, Paloma Faith. When we signed Sam Smith, one of his managers, Elvin, approached Paloma Faith because he knew her because he used to be an artist. And he said, before we make a commitment to Nick and Joe Charrington, who I used to work with, who's now the president of Capitol Records in the UK, he said, what do you think of Nick and Joe? And she said, they're my music mum and dad. And that
Oh,
is and I believe, and I don't, the art thing doesn't even come into it. I'm getting involved with people in their very first job. They're normally generally between the ages of 18 and 21. And I'm taking them on the first part of their career. And I'm now a parent of a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old. And I understand that I'd like that person, if they were doing the same for my child, would look over them with a paternal outlook. And I think that's important.
no, it's a lovely analogy and a lovely metaphor. The other thing which I ask leaders about, keeping yourself healthy. I mean, you are a role model. I know a lot of people in quite strange areas, and we talked about this with, Guy Ritchie when you've been folding him, and he's been folding you in jujitsu,
He's
and you're,
folding me. Let's be clear. Sorry,
yeah,
go on.
you're a black belt, but he's
So
still
is he,
folding
and
you.
he's a very good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Health and well-being. What's your tip to these young people that you're telling them about their mental health and their physical health? Because that will get them off track very quickly if they don't do that. What do you
I,
advise them?
I, I think it's really important. I want to say something that's really, really important at this point about CEOs. I found it astonishing that when we have elite athletes, we put sports psychologists with them, we put dietitians, nutritionists with them, we have strength and conditioning coaches with them. We do all these things, right? And we make sure they're at peak physical condition because that's when your peak mental condition can be. Now, look, if you wear someone out doing heavy weights every morning and they're blurry all afternoon and they're not eating correctly, they're going to make bad decisions. I accept that. But we don't do that to our athletes. We try and get them peak for the moment they need to be peak. I don't understand how you have someone running a multi-billion-dollar company, right, who is not, the company is not paying for them to have a psychologist, right? I love that show Billions, and they've got the in-house psychiatrist, and she's brilliant, right? I love that. And why do we not have these businesses? So for me, I now run my own business and I can't charge it to anyone. And Universal would never pay for it. Sony would never pay for it. But I have a brilliant functional doctor, Pete Williams. I adore him. Yeah, and he does very high level tennis players and very high level CEOs. I've got a little gym in my garage, in my garden. I work out every single day. I do jujitsu 3 times a week. I walk my dog for a minimum of an hour every day. I do it because I want to be, one, I'm vain, accepted. Two, I'm dealing in business with young people. I don't want to turn up looking like an old slob.
Mm.
And three, when someone's trying to get involved with you or be in business with you, I want someone to turn up who actually looks like they care about themselves and what they're doing. And I maybe again sound like someone and people go, oh, that he doesn't sound like a nice guy. Well, that's up to their impression. But I think it's your business to be on top of yourself and everything else.
It's beautifully put. Then the next one, and this is a really interesting one. Emotional and social intelligence. So in the old days, people rated IQ very highly, but they didn't really rate EQ. Just they wanted bright people, and you were particularly bright with numbers. You did economics. You were brought up by entrepreneurial parents. What do you reckon about that ability to listen well to other people? Because it's a real skill for you, and you can easily get distracted, and you get, people are in the kitchen. How do you advise people to listen well to others?
Oh man, I mean, world's greatest hypocrite answering this question,
Uh huh.
me.
Uh huh. That's why I'm
Um,
asking you.
Look, it's been said to me a million times, you have two ears and one mouth, and there's a reason for that. I clearly have two mouths and one ear. Um, but, but in the world of an artist, the artist's voice must be heard, and you have to learn to listen and be respectful. And your job is to facilitate their dream and their vision and their voice.
Yeah.
Um, I've had to learn this over the years. As a young man, I was a bulldozer, and I would sometimes get myself in situations where I'd listen to anyone. Got my fingers burnt multiple times behaving like that. Also managed to. Some people are endeared towards people like me. They want a mouthpiece because they don't want to speak themselves. And one of my favourite moments was when Joe and I won one of the biggest accolades. It was the Music Week A&R Award, and we won it for the second time. And no one's ever won it at two different corporations. Normally, if you do really well, you stay in one corporation. We won it at two. And as we're about to go up, she tapped me on the shoulder and, with, standing up to be, given a standing ovation by all our peers. We'd had this incredible year. It was 2015 we got gave it. 2014 we killed it, just smashed it. We had two acts dominate the global charts and the American charts. And as we went up, she said to me, I'm not going to say anything, so don't ask me to speak, and you have to do the speech. And I stood up there and I remember saying, look, this lady every day tells me I shouldn't do this, I should do this, speak to so and so, did everything else. The reality is she should be receiving this award. The reality is she should be speaking to all of you now. But at the moment it's important to speak and be publicly seen, she wants to hide behind me on this stage saying, so let's give a round of applause for her. And I
That
did
was
that and I
nice.
meant it. But maybe she gravitated towards me at the beginning, one, because I hired her, and two, then she liked the fact that she didn't have to be front and center, and I was happy to be front and center. But the reality is now, you know, as I get older and young people in the room, I'm more the overview person than the driver.
And this is why it was so nice of you to, knowing that my wife Lee is doing the Inspiring Women Leaders podcast. You were talking about Joe and Jody as being two ideal people on there, because one of the things Lee and I find time and again, that we have to help a lot of the female leaders, CEOs, and find their voice, because the
Yes.
men, we just talk over everybody, you know. And headhunting friends of mine, they go, I've got to help the women, because if they've got 90% of what's required for the job, they go, oh, I haven't got that last 10%. Blokes go, I've got 50%. I can bluff the rest. I'll just blag it and tell them I'm a nightclub bouncer and I've run a club before, even though I haven't done a day. I can do that. And it is a gender difference unless you get, and we found those from Canada, Australia, America, New Zealand, the women were much more brought up to be much more confident and find their voice. So I think it's a key area you touch on. Nick, we're coming to the very end, and we always end with a top leadership tip from a leader. So would you, this is a piece in its own right, it's part of the podcast, but it's in its own right too. Would you tell us who you are, what you're doing now, a little bit about what you've done in the past, perhaps some of the artists you've worked with, and share with us a practical leadership tip which CEOs around the world could use?
Okay, my name is Nick Raphael. I've been a music industry professional for 30 years. I run Capitol Records, Epic part Sony, Capitol part of Universal. I've worked with artists as diverse as Sam Smith, Imogen Heap, Jay-Z, The Priest, Paloma Faith, and many, many, many more. I apologize to all the other artists I haven't name checked. And my and now I have my own company called NWS Music Group with my partner Christian and my two other partners Charlie and Ben, and we are a global music company doing it independently for ourselves now, and it's going very, very well. But my leadership tip, and it came out of our conversation beforehand, I think you remember it, and I've had it all my life because at an early stage I was good at sports. I was always the sports captain. And I realized this really quickly. I don't know why, I don't know how, maybe because my parents were entrepreneurs and they ran their own businesses. And I always learned that when things went well, it was we. We did this, we did that. And when things went badly and it was a mistake, I did it. Because your team worked for you and you are the leader and you're meant to protect them. At the same time, when things go well and praise is often overly given to the leader, you have to deflect that praise to the team, because without them, you can't have achieved it. Mm. And I've always thought that that's one of the keyest things. And I've seen in corporations some of the worst behavior you could ever imagine. And people who are like 3 rooms along suddenly claim to be involved in something that they weren't at any meeting. They were never involved. They never got involved. And I think it's really important for all of us as leaders to remember, when it goes well, it's we. And when it goes wrong, you have to take the responsibility, and it's I. And until, and maybe when Joe goes on to Lee's podcast and I'll ask Joe to do it, she will say, yeah, he's correct. He did do that. Maybe she'll say he didn't do it as much as he says he did. But the truth is, I've always intended to do it, and I've always made it part of my management leadership style.
Well, look, Nick Raphael, thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. From the moment I met you, I knew you're the right kind of guest to have on here. We've had a fantastic conversation. I know people will take a lot away from it. And good luck with continuing to find the 1 in 3. And
please, can it be 3 in 3? It'd be so much easier. It won't be. Okay, thank you.